It's good to be with you today, this very frosty morning in New York. It really steadies me to see you all here, supporting each other in this practice. And I had a whole talk prepared about our study text, Shadoka, and I sat down and I looked at it last night. And it seemed okay, and then I walked away from it, and suddenly there was a little voice in my head, and the little voice said, no, that's not really what's going to do it. Uh, it said that I needed to be really honest with you. So here goes. I'm scared. And as you hear me make that statement, check in with yourself and notice what's happening for you right now hearing me make that statement. Is it resonating with you? Is it causing you a problem? Do you identify with it? Do you reject it? Are you bored with it? Indifferent to it? Just check in with your response to what you're experiencing right now, because that is the whole deal. Notice your own experience right now and your response to that experience and work with it, not rejecting it, not embracing it. Shadoka talks about it again and again, not avoiding fantasy, not seeking truth. It's repeated 4 times in the text. So it's a really important point to notice our responses, to recognize what they are, to not hold on to them, and to not indulge them. And that is the practice that we sit together today to share, a practice of zazen. So I have been wanting to be honest about this for some time, and it's not easy to admit that I'm afraid. And of course, I'm afraid of admitting that fear and what it provokes in the listener. So there's layer upon layer of response and response to reality. And this is again fodder for our practice, fuel for our practice. And I'm sure you can guess at what the objects of this fear might be: COVID, political chaos, economic who knows what, climate change, censorship of books, lots of irrational behavior around racial justice and efforts to deny the past. The list goes on and on and on. There seems to be no end to the drumbeat of negative news and stories that we could be concerned about. So I think that the first step is just to notice that that's what we're dealing with, and to recognize our responses in ourselves, to let go of them though, to not indulge them, to not follow them, to notice them and to let them go. Just like zazen. Reading the New York Times really is just like zazen, believe it or not. And at such difficult times, many in our culture do seek consolation from religion. But Zen is not really interested in consolation as many people understand it to be. It is instead offering us total, unconditional, and immediate support if we can allow ourselves to accept that support. And that total, unconditional, and immediate support is reality. exactly the way it is right now. And a moment later, it changes. It is constantly evolving, immediately available, and ever present for us to be present to. And we are completely supported by it. That does not mean we like it or enjoy it, but can we appreciate the support of reality? Right now, and always, the very thing that we feel attacked by and afraid of is offering us its total, unconditional, and immediate support. Of course, we think of support as being good experiences, kind words, a gentle breeze and soft grass to lie upon, and those things do, of course, have their place. They are not excluded from reality. But why narrow our base of support to only the things that we like, excluding everything that offends or troubles us? We have so much more support than we can imagine, even in this difficult time that we are navigating together. So this practice is not about consolation per se. This practice means to encounter and verify reality as it unfolds, and to notice and work intimately with our responses to reality, which is, which are, our responses are not separate from that reality. So maybe you can think back to when you were a kid and you had to go to the cafeteria for lunch. And when you went to the cafeteria, if it was like my school, there would be a sign outside the cafeteria with the bill of fare. And you would get to see what the dishes of the day would be. And many cafeterias don't have the most delectable cuisine. You might have encountered such things as canned meat, oiled with canned vegetables, thinly sliced white bread, or instant mashed potatoes, and inevitably, jello, red, yellow, or green. And with dishes like those, we might have been excused for turning up our nose at the bill of fare. Just as we're turning up our nose at political chaos, economic distress, denial of climate change, and so on and so forth. But it is actually possible through this practice to learn that what reality gives us is nothing but the choicest dishes made to order from scratch all the time. And until we can learn to accommodate that reality, we will never find a moment's peace. It will always be too much or too little, or the wrong time, or the wrong person. There will always be something wrong with the bill of fare. And speaking of the bill of fare, our study text, Shadoka, says, drink and eat as you wish in eternal serenity. All things are transient and completely empty. This is the great enlightenment of the Tathagata. I don't think it could be made any more explicit than that. All things are transient and completely empty. It's constantly changing. There's nothing to hold on to. Just let the responses to the constant change of reality evolve with it and flow with reality. And this is so simple to say, and as I find in my daily experience again and again and again, so incredibly difficult to do. But that is why it's called practice. And as Dogen himself said, practice is enlightenment. So even this practice of letting go of our fear and having it reappear moment by moment is enlightenment. And there is really, I think, some consolation in that for me. It's not the warm and fuzzy consolation that I might prefer. But in the rigor and austerity of this practice, I think there is an incredibly warm and loving embrace. If we can simply open our arms and accept it, the cafeteria is always open, and it is always ready to serve. We see the colors. We hear the clatter of trays and plates. We smell the dishes. We taste the salt. And we think we know, or at least I do, what it's all about. And I do find it painful to witness my own cramped and limited viewpoint, forgetting that the real nature of ignorance, as Shadoka says, is the Buddha nature itself. When Shadoka talks about the real nature of ignorance, it's pointing to something very vast. The dish beyond all dishes, the supreme meal. I am the supreme meal. My experience, my so-called delusion, my so-called enlightenment, my approval seeking, my money grubbing, my hatred of irrationality, my twisted humor, my know-it-allism is the supreme meal. What's the meal for you? What is on the bill of fare for you right now? You don't need a hairnut to taste it. But if you've got a hairnut, I think they're pretty cool. I want to also mention very explicitly that this practice is not a self-improvement campaign. Learning to accommodate reality does not improve us. It does not make us better persons. It does not make us nicer. Or if it does, that's entirely incidental. I mention this because, as Shadoka says, we do not seek truth, nor hold truth. So if you think that your ability to engage with this practice is about becoming a master of truth and the master of yourself, and that when you've done that, everything will be okay, you might be sorely disappointed. I'm not sure that the work is ever done. And I feel great gratitude that it will be continually challenging to me to be in this practice with you. Until my last breath, the work will never be done. What a support as I work in the cafeteria. We, singly and together, are expressions of reality. Everything we love, everything we hate, everything we crave, and everything we fear is an expression of reality. It nourishes our practice inexhaustibly. I'd like to bring Dogen into this conversation. In his Dharma Blossoms, Turn Dharma Blossoms, he writes, thus, realization is reality right now. Even shocks, doubts, fears, and frights are none other than reality right now. There he says it. Even shocks, doubts, fears and frights are none other than reality right now. However, with Buddha knowledge, it is different. Seeing a speck of dust is different from sitting within a speck of dust. Even when you sit in the world of phenomena, it is not broad. Even when you sit in a speck of dust, it is not narrow. If you are not fully present, you do not fully sit. If you are fully present, you are free of how large or narrow it is where you are. I've got to read that one again. If you are fully present, you are free of how large or narrow it is where you are. Thus, you have thoroughly experienced the essential unfolding of Dharma blossoms. A speck of dust is not narrow. The world of phenomena is not broad. My conventional, calculating, conniving, judgmental point of view has it all backwards. Or maybe it's more accurate to say that when I've got that mindset, I'm only seeing one side of the coin. If you are fully present, you are free of how large or narrow it is where you are. This is the very point of Shloka, where we read, if you seek elsewhere, you cannot see it. You cannot grasp it. You cannot reject it. In the midst of not gaining, in that condition, you gain it. Being fully present means being fully available to receive our experience of reality, just as it is, including our responses to that experience. We see the delusions that so many of our responses depend upon, but we don't reject our delusions and we don't seek truth. What is the truth? That's a pretty big question in itself. Shloka says, the truth is not set forth. The false is basically vacant. Put both existence and non-existence aside. Then even non-vacancy is vacant. The 20 kinds of vacancy have no basis, and the oneness of the Tathagata being is naturally sameness. The truth is not set forth, but there is the expression of the truth. And what expressions do we like and dislike? Can we notice that? And then, when it's appropriate in our own situation, take action in that. What about some recent expressions? I'd like to bring these up. There was an apartment fire in the Bronx within the last week or so. 17 people died. Dozens lost their homes and belongings. It was a real tragedy. A building inhabited largely by immigrants from West Africa. So one response to that reality could be to donate to the Mayor's Fund so that the victims of that fire can be supported. Imagine losing your home in this kind of weather, in the dead of winter. And on top of that, imagine coming from Western Africa, where I don't think this kind of weather ever happens. It must be pretty rough. Another reality that we could respond to is the Rohingya being persecuted by the Buddhist majority in Myanmar. Or what about those who are displaced in Colorado, in California, in Australia, and in Greece by wildfires? They are us. Those Western African immigrants in the Bronx are us. So are the many killed and the many injured in gun violence, mass shootings that have occurred. There were 693 separate mass shootings in the United States in 2021. Thousands are injured and dying every year from gun violence. What about that reality? Can we do something about it? Or just sit with it, knowing that it's happening and not separating from it? There is actually even a more modest thing that we can do, and I observe this in my daily walks around my neighborhood. I was walking along an avenue and I noticed a person in front of me, and he took out his phone and he started to look at it. And then he slightly turned his head and looked behind him and stepped to the sidewalk edge, out of the middle of the sidewalk, off to the edge where he could stop and look at his phone. Now, you might think that's very simple and obvious, but a few days later, I was walking along a much narrower sidewalk, and I came upon another person. And that person was planted directly in the middle of the sidewalk, looking at her phone. Right in the center of a narrow sidewalk, dead stopped. And I don't offer you these two examples because I want to moralize about how good the person moving to the edge of the sidewalk was and how bad the person who occupied the center of the sidewalk was. The point is that we can actually make choices that encompass everything around us, because everything we do affects everyone, whether we notice it or not. And we, in turn, are affected by everything that is done. And so we can constantly make choices that are beneficial or harmful to the general flow of society, not to morality, and not about being a good person or a nice person, but helping the flow to continue and not obstructing it. And I think that is really the message of Shadoka overall, is that we do not have to make obstacles of ourselves or our beliefs, and that we can flow with reality and be with it. So I hope that this has given you some encouragement to do that. I feel strengthened by Shadoka to let go of my views, to not hold on to my fear, to not get stuck in panic or discouragement, but to know that everything is changing all the time, that I am connected to everything all the time, and that I am completely supported by everything all the time. Thank you.